History often turns on moments that seem too fragile to matter. A desperate counterattack, a failed negotiation, a single leader who refuses to surrender. But imagine a world where those moments fell just slightly differently. A world where the fragile nations of Eastern Europe, exhausted but unbroken after World War I, chose not to stand alone, but to stand together. This is the story of Intermarium, the alliance that almost existed, and the alternate world that might have risen if it had. In the aftermath of World War I, as empires collapsed like cracked stone, Poland re-emerged on the map for the first time in generations. Among the architects of this rebirth was Józef Pilsudski, a revolutionary soldier strategist who dreamed far beyond Poland's borders. He envisioned a regional federation known as the Międzymorze, the Intermarium, a union of Eastern European nations strong enough to secure their collective independence from both Germany and Russia. But the birth of the Second Polish Republic was anything but peaceful. Poland found itself fighting for its survival almost the moment it regained its breath. The Polish-Ukrainian War erupted in November 1918 and raged until mid-1919, shaping the contested eastern frontier. At the same time, the Greater Poland Uprising restored the crucial Polish corridor. A brief clash with Czechoslovakia in January 1919 ended with the division of Chechen Silesia. And in Silesia itself, a series of uprisings between 1919 and 1921 saw ethnic Poles turn back German attempts to reclaim the region. Yet the most dramatic episode, the one that cemented Pilsudski's legend, was the Polish-Soviet War. As the Russian Civil War tore the East apart, Poland sought to recover its historic lands. But the Soviets counterattacked with overwhelming force, pushing all the way to the gates of Warsaw. In what would later be called the Miracle on the Vistula, Pilsudski's daring maneuver reversed the tide. The Polish army not only repelled the invasion, but prevented communist expansion into the heart of Europe. Despite the victory, internal politics betrayed Pilsudski's broader vision. Rivals negotiated the Treaty of Riga, abandoning plans for an Eastern Federation and leaving Ukraine and Belarus to Soviet control. Poland fell into political chaos until Pilsudski seized power in a 1926 coup, aiming to modernize and stabilize the fractured state. His rule brought relative order, but his death in 1935 left the nation without its most capable leader. Economically, the young republic struggled yet made progress, introducing a stable currency in 1924 and slowly rebuilding industry despite hostile trade policies from Berlin and Moscow. Militarily, Poland was strong in manpower but hampered by outdated doctrine. Meanwhile, two storm clouds grew in the distance: Hitler's rising Reich and Stalin's expanding communist empire. Both nations viewed Poland as an obstacle, and neither intended to tolerate that obstacle for long. In 1939, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact sealed Poland's fate. Germany and the Soviet Union coordinated their invasions, carving the country apart and extinguishing the Second Polish Republic. The Intermarium, Poland's best chance at collective survival, died long before it ever lived. But in an alternate timeline, the story takes a different course. Imagine a Poland that emerged from the Polish-Soviet War with an even more decisive victory, one that expanded its sphere of influence across liberated Ukrainian and Belarusian territories. This triumph convinced Eastern European nations that unity was no longer a dream, but a necessity. Pooling resources, they coordinated defenses, harmonized economies, and forged a common strategy against future aggressors. Trade linked their industries, and shared security cemented their loyalties. By 1923, the Intermarium Federation officially formed,
initially comprising Poland, the Baltic states, Belarus, and Ukraine.
Its political system blended strong federal leadership with regional autonomy. The Federation Sejm elected a central leader, while France and Britain quietly supported the new bloc with military technology and advisory missions. Ukrainian diplomats even persuaded France to extend the Maginot Line to the Atlantic, hardening Western Europe's defenses. Recognizing Czechoslovakia's industrial power, Poland pursued close relations, while Hungary, a traditional Polish ally, strengthened ties as well. In 1927, the Treaty of Pechvar brought Czechoslovakia and Hungary into the Intermarium, Poland compensating with territorial concessions in Silesia.
Modernization accelerated. Romania, destabilized by political turmoil, experienced a Hungary-backed revolt in 1931.
The resulting settlement ceded territory to both Hungary and Poland, established a pro-Intermarium monarch, and integrated Romania into the Federation, bringing with it valuable oil reserves.
Yugoslavia signed several mutual defense agreements, linking its fate ever closer to the Federation.
Lithuania peacefully integrated with Poland in 1932, and by 1933, citizens enjoyed free movement across the entire bloc. Ambitious plans to strike Germany after its rearmament began proved premature, but the Intermarium's economic boom of the mid-1930s transformed it into Europe's largest economy. Railways, industry, and scientific contributions, especially from Jewish refugees and expelled scholars, strengthened the Federation. By 1936, the Intermarium fielded over 2 million soldiers and a rapidly modernizing air force. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, exhausted by internal conflicts and a prolonged civil war, struggled to match the Federation's rise. Attempts to destabilize its neighbors through espionage and revolutionary agitation consistently failed.
Germany, alarmed by the Federation's strength, turned to Mussolini earlier than in real history, forming a southern axis.
Austria, weakened by depression and civil strife, refused union with Germany and instead sought protection under the Intermarium. In 1936, Austria signed the Treaty of Budapest, formally joining the alliance. Enraged, Germany struck. In 1939, they launched a lightning assault on Austria, overwhelming the country and forcing its government to flee to Warsaw. Emboldened by British appeasement, Berlin underestimated the Federation's ability to resist. Unbeknownst to Europe, Germany and the Soviet Union secretly formed the Berlin-Moscow axis, coordinating strategies against the Intermarium and the Western Allies. World War II began with Poland, France, Britain, and the Intermarium on one side, and Germany and the Soviet Union on the other. Germany's early advances into Poland met fierce resistance from fortified defenses. Blitzkrieg faltered, and Allied-backed rebel groups seized eastern Austria. After a brutal 6-week siege, Vienna fell to the Intermarium, inflicting devastating losses on Germany. Yugoslavia pressed northward, tightening the noose. 2 months later, the Soviet Union struck Ukraine. The sudden offensive overwhelmed border regions, but the Soviets underestimated the Federation's resilience. Despite heavy losses, Intermarium forces held the major cities. A massive Soviet push toward the Dnieper ended in catastrophe. After 8 months of brutal fighting, the Red Army lost nearly 2 million soldiers around Kiev, while Ukrainian losses remained far smaller. The Axis continued assaults against Belarus and the Baltics. Finland, fearing Soviet aggression and witnessing the Intermarium's resolve, joined the Allies. Estonia repelled Soviet invasion attempts, suffering horrific casualties but ultimately holding its ground. By 1940, the Eastern Front of this alternate Europe was entering a new and volatile phase. The Soviet advance through Belarus had finally broken against entrenched Intermarium defenses, inflicting staggering casualties on Moscow's forces. At the same time, Stalin attempted to seize Estonia to dominate the Baltic and sever Finland's link to the Federation, but Estonian resistance proved fiercer than expected. The forests and marshes turned into killing grounds, and the campaign froze into a bloody stalemate. Further south, Ukrainian and Intermarium divisions launched a sweeping counteroffensive, retaking several key cities and dealing the Soviets their heaviest losses yet. The balance of Europe shifted again when Bulgaria, Greece, and Albania entered the war on the Allied side, strengthening the growing anti-Axis coalition. On the Western Front, Germany managed modest gains in Poland, pushing into Poznan, Bydgoszcz, and linking East Prussia with Königsberg. But the invasion of France immediately unraveled. French and British armies held firm behind their fortified lines, absorbing the assault and halting the German drive. The Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg fell quickly, yet France remained unbroken at the Belgian frontier. In East Prussia, Polish forces captured several cities and pushed German troops back to the Baltic coast. German offensives toward Katowice stalled, while Slovak units fighting alongside the Intermarium seized Gliwice in the south. By summer, control of Austria fractured. Both sides held pockets along the Danube. Ultimately, Vienna fell to Yugoslav forces, igniting nationalist celebrations as German troops retreated. By autumn, Linz and Graz were overrun by joint Hungarian-Polish advances, pushing the Wehrmacht back into the Alpine fortresses around Salzburg. The city endured a siege but maintained supply lines. Czechoslovakia, fortified and determined, easily repelled repeated German attacks. Italy still avoided direct involvement, providing only symbolic aid to Berlin. By year's end, Germany had lost over 500,000 soldiers, and morale within the Reich was beginning to fracture. Germany's renewed offensive into France suffered a crushing setback when several French army groups counterattacked, reducing entire German formations. Paris employed a long-term strategy of thinning their lines and steadily choking Germany's industrial capacity, a plan that began to drag the Reich toward exhaustion. To the north, Polish armies launched a large-scale offensive. The siege of Königsberg turned disastrous for Germany. Weeks of bombardment shattered defensive positions, and the city eventually fell, though many historic landmarks survived by sheer fortune. Meanwhile, Czech forces in the south not only halted German attacks, but captured strategic cities, including Dresden, a shocking humiliation for Berlin. Austria, emboldened by Germany's losses, rose again. With Intermarium support, the Austrian military expelled remaining German forces from the Alps and declared the nation once more free of foreign domination. Plans even surfaced to unite Catholic Bavaria with a greater Austrian state. In the east, the Soviet Union deteriorated rapidly. Intermarium armies dug in across Belarus and Ukraine, inflicting crushing casualties in every Soviet assault. A decisive victory at Salahorsk further weakened Soviet momentum. Farther south, Ukrainian units surged into Russia, capturing Rostov and Luhansk and inching toward Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad became a defining moment. From May to November 1941, combined Intermarium armies fought block by block until Soviet defenses collapsed. Nearly 800,000 Soviet troops were lost, a defeat so catastrophic that it sparked uprisings across the Caucasus. Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan declared independence, breaking away from a collapsing Soviet state. Meanwhile, on December 7, 1941, Japan struck Pearl Harbor. But in this timeline, Tokyo was not aligned with Berlin or Moscow, forcing the United States to focus its strength entirely on the Pacific rather than European fronts, a development with enormous long-term consequences. The year 1942 brought relentless disaster for the Red Army. Defeats mounted at Krasnodar, Stavropol, and Armavir. The last major concentration of Soviet troops fled to Astrakhan, which fell after a 6-month siege, freeing the entire Caucasus region. In Belarus, Intermarium legions pushed northward, capturing Tula and Ryazan. On the Baltic front, Federation forces regained Novgorod, while Finland, now fully committed, captured Karelia with little resistance and turned their sights on Leningrad. The siege of Leningrad began in June 1942. Finnish and Intermarium artillery pounded the city, one of the Soviet Union's last industrial strongholds. Losses on both sides were severe, yet after a year of combat, the situation had hardened into a stalemate. Meanwhile, the siege of Moscow erupted in June. Belarusian and Polish units bombarded the capital, supported by relentless Polish airstrikes. In August, Soviet counterattacks briefly slowed the offensive, but by November, Moscow fell. Over 310,000 Soviet soldiers were killed, and another 600,000 were taken prisoner, though only a fraction survived the forced marches to prison camps. With Moscow gone, the USSR clung to a single major city, a state teetering on collapse. In the West, German defeat was imminent. British and French armies broke through the German lines in the Benelux region. Luxembourg was liberated in April, followed by Ghent, Liège, Brussels, and Antwerp. By November, large swaths of the Netherlands were free, including Eindhoven and Rotterdam. On the Baltic coast, the Polish-Lithuanian army won a decisive victory at the Battle of Danzig, causing 84,000 German casualties and leaving the city nearly obliterated. Polish offensives continued, reclaiming Gdansk and Poznan by midsummer. The German army fractured from within as elements of the Wehrmacht rebelled and turned against the SS. Intermarium forces pushed deeper, capturing Wrocław, Chemnitz, and Frankfurt. Frankfurt's fall in November symbolized the collapse of Hitler's authority. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, architect of Operation Valkyrie in real history, was appointed provisional head of state by a reformist Wehrmacht council. Negotiations with the Intermarium followed. Germany agreed to dissolve the SS, accept partition, and surrender territory in exchange for Polish guarantees of fair treatment and civilian protection. In return, Poland pledged military and economic cooperation to help rebuild a future democratic Germany. Czech armies captured Leipzig with heavy air support, then seized Erfurt. Austria, Hungary, and Romania advanced swiftly from the south, taking Munich and forcing the surrender of Augsburg. By November, Austria formally joined the Intermarium after the collapse of German fascism. The Allies continued their liberation of the Netherlands and advanced deeper into Germany. By 1943, the SS was collapsing under constant Allied pressure and failing morale. British bombers destroyed SS manufacturing plants, crippling the Nazi war machine and spreading panic among German civilians. Allied gains accelerated. The fortress of Koblenz fell in March, opening a path to the Rhine. By June, the Allies seized Freiburg, Mannheim, Mainz, Cologne, Dusseldorf, Essen, Dortmund, and Oldenburg. Many SS soldiers, seeing no hope, surrendered en masse. In the east, Austrian and Polish armies, supported by the Wehrmacht renegades of the new German provisional government, captured Stuttgart and Rosenheim. With the heart of Germany exposed, Polish forces spearheaded the push toward Berlin, subjecting the city to months of intense bombardment.
The Polish-Lithuanian advance reached the Elbe River, linking liberated territories and reinforcing Intermarium strongholds.
Soon after, they captured Hanover, tightening the encirclement of the final SS remnants. On October 18th, the final SS formations surrendered, bringing their resistance to an end. With Germany's fascist war machine dismantled, the Provisional Wehrmacht government immediately redirected its focus toward the still raging struggle against the collapsing Soviet Union. The Intermarium seized the moment and called for the Luxembourg Peace Conference, gathering France, Britain, and the new German authorities. The purpose was clear: unify Europe against the threat of Soviet communism. Winston Churchill pushed strongly for this vision and insisted that Bolshevism had to be eliminated completely for Europe to remain stable. The post-war restructuring of Germany reflected this new strategy. The country was divided into separate states to prevent any renewed militarism. Hanover, Westphalia emerged as a French-aligned industrial powerhouse, while Austria expanded northward to create the Catholic Republic of Austria-Bavaria. The most consequential change, however, came within the Intermarium itself, with the rebirth of Prussia. Guided by Chancellor Tresckow and positioned as a protectorate of Poland, Lithuania, the Federal Republic of Prussia was treated with respect to avoid breeding the resentment that had once fueled aggressive nationalism. Poland, Lithuania returned parts of the old corridor and preserved historical Prussian lands, including Königsberg, while Berlin remained a unified, internationally supported reconstruction zone. Through careful cultural direction, the Federation encouraged Prussians to embrace their older civic identity, distancing them from the destructive nationalism that had dominated the 20th century. In turn, Prussia became a valuable German partner for Poland, Lithuania in future European politics. Territorial adjustments spread across the region. The Netherlands expanded to the Ems River. Belgium gained land near Aachen. France absorbed Isar. Poland, Lithuania secured territory up to the Oder, and Czechoslovakia pushed south to the Danube. Yet, while diplomats debated borders, the Eastern Front entered its deadliest phase. Around 800,000 Intermarium soldiers and nearly 3 million Soviets lost their lives. Victory, however, was decisive. Leningrad finally fell, joining Moscow and Stalingrad under Intermarium control, and the liberation of the Caucasus deprived the Soviets of the oil they desperately needed. Stalin's assassination plunged the Soviet Union into deeper chaos. The remaining leadership retreated into Siberia, hoping that distance, winter, and attrition would save what little remained of their state. But by 1944, Soviet support had evaporated completely. Allied armies swept across every territory west of the Urals, capturing shattered cities filled with civilians suffering from famine, bombardment, and years of brutal conflict. Soviet guerrilla resistance continued, but disease, internal rebellion, and exhaustion made collapse inevitable. Meanwhile, events in the Pacific were unfolding along a very different path. With Europe stabilized, the United States devoted its strength to Japan. Under an altered Lend-Lease strategy, nationalist China, not the Soviet Union, became the primary recipient of American aid, receiving nearly $40 billion worth of supplies. Armed with modern equipment and supported by aggressive American submarine warfare that strangled Japan's shipping, Chiang Kai-shek's forces defeated Japan's exhausted armies and crushed Mao's communist movement before it could rise. Without a communist China, the Korean and Vietnam Wars never materialized, and Asia entered a radically different era. Finally, on December 26, 1949, the Soviet Union surrendered. Communist regimes collapsed worldwide, unable to survive without the USSR's support. As victory celebrations faded, the Allies turned their attention to Russia's future. The Intermarium, having carried the heaviest burden in the Eastern War, demanded a long-term solution to prevent any revival of Russian imperial power.
Russia was divided into several successor states, each with its own political character.
The central territories around Moscow formed the Confederation of Russian States under loose Belarusian oversight.
Novgorod, long a rival to Moscow, emerged as a Polish-aligned republic.
The Volgograd Commonwealth became a Ukrainian protectorate within the Intermarium. Meanwhile, the vast Siberian regions fell under Chinese dominance and were reorganized into a new Siberian republic. Other territories broke away entirely. Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the Kuban region came under Ukrainian influence, while the Central Asian republics declared independence but quickly drifted into China's orbit.
Ukraine extended its borders to the Don, Belarus pushed eastward, and Finland seized the opportunity to annex Karelia.
With the Budapest Agreement complete, the Intermarium transformed into a massive multinational federation, an alliance that now included Poland, Lithuania, Prussia, Czechoslovakia, Austria-Bavaria, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Romania, Ukraine, Volgograd, Novgorod, Belarus, Latvia, and Estonia. Despite recent wounds, these nations committed themselves to reconciliation, stability, and prosperity. The Intermarium had reshaped Europe more profoundly than any empire of the previous century. It crushed fascist Germany, dismantled the Soviet Union, and prevented the creation of communist China. Through unity and shared purpose, it showed that cooperation between nations could overcome even the darkest ideologies.